Emotions are running high over abortion rights in America, 3 months after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. More voters are now saying the future of abortion in America is a major factor driving their vote this November as the midterm elections approach. I'm Andrew Rafferty of Newsy. And I'm Libby Casey of The Washington Post. This is Election 22, What Matters?
We must agree that the women of America have the ability to exercise their own judgment in making decisions about their own body.
Abortion is on the ballot in a way we haven't seen in a generation.
We are definitely on the ballot. We know that they're going to start printing those ballots today, and they will be in the mail in the next few weeks.
Voters across 5 states are set to act, and more Republicans are pledging new action if they take the majority in Congress.
Post-Dobbs, America's got to make some decisions.
This is a Washington Post Newsy special, Election 22, What Matters? Now, from the Washington Post newsroom, Libby Casey and Andrew Rafferty.
When the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in June, the ripple effects were immediately felt across the country. So-called trigger laws in more than a dozen states restricting or outlawing abortion immediately went into effect.
Leading conservatives celebrated, saying the Supreme Court decided correctly, returning the issue to the states. Yet now, more Republicans, including Senator Lindsey Graham, are pushing for a national abortion ban after 15 weeks, except in some cases. 5 states are directly voting on the issue this November: Michigan, Montana, Vermont, California, and Kentucky, all with abortion-related measures on the ballot. Later this half hour, our reporter on the ground in Montana will join us.
Nationally, a majority of Americans support the right to an abortion in all or most cases, 61% according to a Pew poll. A little more than a third of Americans think abortion should be illegal in all or most cases. We will get into the political debate in just a moment, but we want to begin with the reality, how lives across the country are being affected even before November's election. The CDC's most recent data is from 2019, and there were just under 630,000 legal induced abortions that year, a decline of about 18% over the decade. More than half of abortions performed are for women in their 20s. Virtually all of them, 93%, were performed earlier than 13 weeks of pregnancy. Less than 1% of abortions were performed after 21 weeks. We begin our reporting with Nick Bradshaw in Texas.
You are taught a whole bunch of conservative values growing up in Texas, and I was certainly taught very conservative values growing up in Texas.
In your typical church-going, closed on Sunday type of town in Texas. We are deep in the heart of Texas, in fact, in an area that's super conservative. You see the American flag fly. People here are all about home, but there's one lady who finds herself right in the middle of the debates about abortion.
Just kind of like didn't give much thought to pregnancy or how hard pregnancy could be. And at that point, everything still looked great. His heart looked normal. He was growing at a normal rate. The only thing really strange about it is that he was curled up in a little ball.
Okay, ready?
For Kaylee Despain, her dream has been to raise her family where she grew up.
Finley is our son. You like to come out. Tumbleweed might bite your ankle.
It was a dream she thought finally came true after surviving cancer and several failed pregnancies, but a doctor's appointment would change that story.
She was kind of talking to herself, and she mentioned, that's weird. There's not very much amniotic fluid in there with him.
At the same time, the talk on front porches across Texas was about a new law.
Our Creator endowed us with the right to life.
Governor Greg Abbott signed what's known as the Heartbeat Law.
And yet, millions of children lose their right to life every year,
putting an end to abortions in the state of Texas.
This fringe extremist policy of Greg Abbott, a total ban on all abortions beginning at conception.
When we were almost 19 weeks, his genetic testing came back, and it came back with a full triploidy result.
That's when doctors told Kaylee Finley wouldn't survive.
So it's overlying your cervix, it looks like right now.
Then she teared up and she said, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry that I can't do anything for you here. I want to be able to treat you here, but, you know, we want you safe above all. Got into the car and we drove 10 hours.
That drive was to receive an abortion. If not, according to doctors, Kaylee could have died.
That's Freckles.
Tell me a little bit about Freckles.
So this is Finley's little heartbeat giraffe.
In the bill, there is a part that says an abortion is allowed for, quote, medical emergencies.
Instead of the doctor being able to intervene right then, they have to wait until you are experiencing complications so severe that they can prove to the state of Texas that you're going to die.
Who do you blame for this?
Oh, gosh. I blame our lawmakers. Wholeheartedly. I lay this at their feet. This is 100% on them.
But in a catch-22, doctors told her it might be best for her family to move out of the state of Texas if they wanted to try and have another child.
And that's really unfortunate because, you know, this is supposed to be a pro-life law, and instead, you are causing women to second guess, you know, should we be in Texas? Should we be trying to conceive in the state of Texas? Is this safe for us?
And hoping one day she'll be called Mom. All right, Andrew, you know, something to point out that we talked about in that story there is the fact there is a part of the law that says if there's an emergency, a doctor can perform an abortion. But there's a problem with that. That law is very murky, and so therefore some doctors, they tell me that they have to make that decision, and they have to be able to prove that that person was going to die.
Nick Bradshaw reporting from Waco. Nick, don't go too far. We'll chat again in just a few minutes as part of our roundtable.
Our first guest is Carol Tobias. She's a supporter of the movement to end abortion rights in America, and she's the president of the National Right to Life Committee. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I want to start off by talking about Senator Graham's bill that would ban abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. You were there with him, Ms. Tobias, at the press conference where he announced it. So does that mean the National Right to Life is comfortable with abortions up to 15 weeks?
Our position for many, many years has been to protect as many babies as possible as soon as possible. This would be certainly one step in that right direction. So yes, we do support this bill.
But what about abortions up to 15 weeks?
Oh, we will support legislation that's going to protect babies. Certainly we will support earlier restrictions. This was a bill that Senator Graham wanted to introduce. And actually it's been sitting in Congress for 10 years. And yes, we support legislation at all stages of pregnancy.
So let's talk about the mothers and women who could die if they don't have an abortion. We just heard this very powerful piece coming out of Texas. What would you say to someone who is forced to travel across state lines or do something because they feel their abortion is medically necessary to save their life?
There is no state in the union that would prevent an abortion if the mother's life is in danger. I know people are saying that, you know, she could die if she doesn't get the abortion. If that's the case, she can get the abortion. There is no state in the union that does not allow the removal of ectopic pregnancies or does not allow miscarriages to be treated. There are a lot of, I'll just say it, lies flying around right now. And I think maybe it'll take a little while, but we need people to understand the truth that if her life is in danger, she can get the abortion.
I just have to push back on that because the Washington Post and other news outlets have talked to people who have had to travel across state lines and get into perilous situations because doctors just weren't quite sure what to do.
That's what, quite frankly, I don't understand. That's why someone goes to medical school. That's why they become an OBGYN, and that's what they learn in school, is how to treat pregnancies. They understand if it is an ectopic pregnancy, if it is a miscarriage. They should be able to take care of that. I've certainly talked to a lot of doctors who will say, you know, they know what to do. That's what they trained for. So I don't know if these doctors are just being hypersensitive or if they are trying to use this to make a point to try to further the abortion industry. But any woman should be able to get treated for an ectopic pregnancy and miscarriage because there is nobody that is going to prosecute for that.
What do you think about the Texas law in other states that are potentially criminalizing someone who just gives someone a ride? I mean, maybe that's some of the hesitation doctors have if anyone is sort of deputized to go after them or accuse them of something.
I think I know we do. We've got 50 states. Justice Brandeis many years ago called the states the laboratories of democracy. So I think we've got 50 states, and we're going to have different experiments in various states. If it doesn't work, it's going to change. Someone else might, take something like that, but make their own changes. And we'll see what happens.
And finally, Ms. Tobias, some Republicans are running away from Lindsey Graham's legislation out of fear that it will mobilize voters against them in November. What's your response to that?
Pro-life people have always come out in stronger numbers. Now, I'm sure the other side is going to be motivated this year, but I know pro-lifers are just as energetic. So I don't think there's going to be a backlash against our candidates because of their pro-life position.
Carol Tobias, president of the National Right to Life Committee, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Well, Andrew, Ms. Tobias talks about people who are anti-abortion rights traditionally being motivated, but we do not know what the Roe v. Wade decision means for people who are pro-abortion rights. We haven't seen this in a generation.
No, we certainly haven't. And one of the interesting things is with this Lindsey Graham bill, he talks about public opinion, how this would put the United States within kind of the confines of European countries, put us in the mainstream. But shifting public opinion has really characterized the voters since that Dobbs decision. And it's not everybody who feels like this is really the mainstream. And that's going to be who decides who actually shows up to vote in November. That's going to be the key question.
And Graham isn't saying abortion should be legal up to 15 weeks. He wants to leave that to the states, which is not in step with those countries he's referring to. Well, the big political question, how will this debate impact the midterms? We'll find out in our political roundtable with reporters in Washington, D.C., Texas, and Montana. This is Election 22, What Matters, a collaboration between the Washington Post and Newsy. New polling shows the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade is not only unpopular with the majority of Americans, it appears to be energizing those opposed to the ruling more than those in support. An NBC News poll conducted this month shows 61% of Americans say they are against the ruling. 37% are in support. So how will that square with turnout and voting in the midterms? We are joined once again by Newsy political director Andrew Rafferty, also Amber Phillips, political reporter and writer of the Washington Post newsletter, The 5-Minute Fix. In Waco, Texas, reporter Nick Bradshaw of KXXV. And in Missoula, Montana, Newsy correspondent Maritsa Georgiou. So, Nick, abortion is now a felony in Texas, and that trigger law took effect after the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe. To what degree is that decision expected to motivate turnout in November?
You know, it's hard to tell right now, but I will tell you this. A recent poll shows that the majority of Texans actually believes that abortion should be legal. You know, at this point, it's difficult to tell if that's going to drive voters one way or the other with so many other issues in Texas taking place.
Yeah, Nick, so if a person right now wants or needs an abortion, what are their options?
You know, a lady I spoke to earlier, her only option was to drive hours, get a hotel, and go to New Mexico. That's one option. Of course, the border is really close to Texas, and so that's another option, or to go to a state where abortion is legal. That's what they're telling me their options are right now. And for many of them, they feel like they're lost, not sure what to do. In fact, one lady told me she's thinking about moving out of Texas into a, quote, safer state to be a woman.
Well, Maritsa, let's turn to you in Montana, a state where abortion is on the ballot this fall. What's the feeling there? Are people motivated to vote because of it?
Well, people feel very strongly on all sides of this issue. You know, it's a very nuanced. Abortion itself, the right to an abortion, isn't on the ballot this fall, but instead it's a ballot measure, Born Alive Infant Protection Act. Really, it deals with the decision-making around the time of pregnancy loss. It actually could mean a criminal prosecution of healthcare providers if they don't do everything in their power to preserve the life of an infant born, say, with a heartbeat, born breathing, born with certain muscle functions. In Montana, though, keep in mind, abortion currently past viability is against the law unless it would be for life-saving measures. Proponents of this ballot measure are really painting this as all about abortion, saying if a baby happens to be born during an abortion procedure with a heartbeat, with some of those functions I laid out, that the provider would have to do everything they could to save that baby. But opponents of this measure are saying, hold on a second. There are lots of scenarios that this could have a huge effect on. Let's say there are pregnancy complications, or suddenly a family past viability learns their baby would not survive outside of the womb, a baby they very much want. I hear from medical providers that this happens quite frequently, weekly, where a family and their medical provider might choose to deliver that baby just for the sake of holding that baby, seeing that baby, maybe baptizing that baby, and then saying goodbye to that baby. So there will be a lot more than just abortion if this passes. As far as what voters think about it, I think we really have yet to see a lot of messaging and education on this specific ballot measure. We're less than 2 months away from this election. I think that we will start, I know we will start to see the campaigns on both sides of this really ramp up, trying to get their message out. So at this point, I think it's very nuanced, and I think a lot of voters really don't know all of the specific details about this ballot measure.
Amber Phillips, how much have the laws in states across the country already changed since June's Supreme Court decision?
Yeah, drastically in these past couple months, Libby. So before the Supreme Court decision, let's remember, abortion was legal until about halfway through a pregnancy across the nation. Now it's illegal in the first weeks of pregnancy, or in some cases even at conception, in about 16 to 20 states. And that number varies depending on lawsuits, because abortion rights advocates is in many of these states, as soon as a law is passed banning abortion, go straight to suing. And sometimes that can change whether abortion is legal in a state by the week, for example. A lot of these states had trigger laws on the books that were decades or a couple of years old that immediately banned abortion if Roe v. Wade ever fell. But we're seeing some states, West Virginia and Indiana most recently, proactively meet in special sessions, pull their lawmakers together in the middle of the summer when they're off and say, let's pass an abortion ban. That is happening in a number of states. And so we expect abortion bans in states to grow to as much as half the country, potentially in the next couple of months. This has been a very rapid change.
Well, Andrew, you and I have talked in the past about the importance of the economy and the hearts and minds of Americans in this election. So where is abortion in comparison?
Well, that's probably the most important question right now that's going to decide the midterm elections. I think that's the question that we'll be talking about the Wednesday morning after the elections when we're talking about which parties control power. But to put some perspective on this, because we are talking about abortion, how important it is, look at these numbers from NBC News. They did a poll just the other day where they asked, what's most important to your vote? Is it the cost of living or is it abortion? And you see 59% of respondents said cost of living is the most important factor in their vote, just 37% for abortion. But the key thing that we're going to be watching is the motivation, the enthusiasm, because we know people who care passionately about abortion rights. They've shown up and voted. They voted in that Kansas special. They voted in special elections throughout the country in some of these congressional races. That really was the deciding factor. So how much do people get motivated to vote by abortion versus how much are they motivated to vote because the economy is not that great? That's probably going to decide which side actually wins the midterm elections, Libby.
Amber, what are the upcoming battles in the abortion debate? Like, what legal fights are looming next?
Yeah, well, many are happening right now, Libby. As I mentioned, I'm thinking particularly of a state like Louisiana. Whether abortion was legal changed by the week as abortion rights advocates and anti-abortion advocates battled it out in court. And that's happening all across the country right now. But if we step back nationally and look at this, one big question when Roe fell was medicated abortions. That's increasingly a more popular way, even when Roe was in place, for women to get abortions. And it's a two-pill regime. And the reason I mention that is because a number of red states have already gone ahead and banned taking those pills and getting them mailed or a doctor prescribing them to you. In fact, in Tennessee, it's actually a felony to mail abortion pills if you were to send them to someone out of state. And so we've seen the effect of this nationally, as the national abortion rights provider has actually said, you can travel to us to take one pill, and you can't go home if you're in a red state that's banned abortion to take that second pill. And that has made it nearly impossible for many women to get abortions, even those who are able to travel. The other big question nationally is even more controversial one, and that's, can states litigate women who travel or their allies who help them, who travel across state lines to go get an abortion? This is a really controversial idea that could run afoul of the Constitution's interstate commerce clause. And even conservative Justice Brett Kavanaugh said, when he agreed to knock down Roe v. Wade, that might be a step too far. Yet we're seeing some states look at this. The final thing I'll say, Libby, is on the abortion rights side, the Biden administration was getting a lot of pressure to try to create these sanctuaries, if you will, for abortions in red states. Could they do federal lands, like even national parks? Could they do military bases and just provide abortions there? And the Biden administration quickly nixed that idea, but they're still considering kind of more bureaucratic ways to help. Like, could they create a national emergency on abortion that might just open up a little more funds to try to help people fight some of these legal battles?
Amber Phillips here in Washington, thank you so much. Maritsa Georgiou in Montana, Nick Bradshaw in Texas, thanks to each of you. Andrew and I will be back in just a moment with more on the push to outlaw abortion across the country. Back now in our closing moments with a snapshot of where we are right now in America on the issue of abortion. Andrew, this has been a political issue for more than a generation.
Yeah, and we've been talking a lot about that Lindsey Graham bill. Let's break down exactly what's in it. And first of all, we can put it on the screen here. It bans most abortions after 15 weeks. There are some exceptions for rape, incest, the life of the mother. This key part is the last bullet here, is the states could still pass stricter measures. And so the reaction here in Washington from the folks like Mitch McConnell was, don't do this. This is a bad idea. Stay away. The message has always been that this is best left to the states. But it's interesting, Libby, because a lot of these key Republican Senate candidates haven't been shying away from it in the same way. Herschel Walker in Georgia, Blake Masters, Arizona. Also, Marco Rubio is in the Senate. He's a co-sponsor of this bill. Ted Budd, House representative in North Carolina, running for Senate. They've all said they support this. Whereas folks like Ron Johnson, Don Bolduc, who's in New Hampshire, Joe O'Dea, who's in Colorado, who actually supports most abortion rights, they have run away from it. A number of other candidates have been kind of wishy-washy on it, but it's interesting because a lot more of those Senate candidates seem to be open to it than the initial reaction from those in Washington would suggest.
And on the flip side of that, in Alaska, a Democrat just won a special election for a House seat by running on a campaign of pro-choice and pro-freedom. So in a very libertarian, largely Republican state, she used that issue of freedom and tied it to abortion rights.
Yeah, the freedom message is certainly playing out across the country, beyond Alaska, though I know that's a state you know particularly well.
Yes, I was a longtime reporter there. That's right. Well, on behalf of Andrew, thanks to our guest this hour, and thanks to you for watching this episode of Election 22, What Matters. Next week, we look at a spike in violent crime in major American cities. How will that impact the midterms? We'll discuss. I'm Libby Casey.
And I'm Andrew Rafferty. Thank you for joining us for this collaboration between the Washington Post and Newsy. We'll see you next week.